cut out all this
All
nonsense.
right. Nova, say hi to Dan. Remember Dan?
Hey,
We chatted
Nova.
a few days ago. She's got
Oh,
her work tie on because she knows we're at work, Dan.
well, that's pretty fantastic. At least someone has to go to work. You know what? This isn't going to work. The cord broke. All right.
On your light.
Never mind.
I think it's
Sorry.
it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Hey, no, go kennel, babe. Go kennel. Go kennel. Dad'll be with you shortly,
There
okay?
you go.
Love you. Love you.
All right.
Let me grab my Pepsi and we're all set.
I'm on my phone.
Can you hear that, Dan?
Yes. Oh, no, actually, it's silent now.
Is
That's
it
weird.
silent?
Yeah. Now I heard that one.
You heard that one? Maybe it's just too quiet. Dan, please don't judge me, and I won't judge you, cause it can get ugly before it gets beautiful. I had to throw that in just because of a lot of our interests align, a lot of mental health stuff, some vulnerability, but some deep thought combined with it. Guys, for anyone watching this, this is Dan Gummo. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself and briefly tell viewers how we met?
Well, yes, indeed. Well, we met playing racquetball, of all things. We were kind of hit it off, and I mean that literally. And yeah, and I guess I got into all this because once upon a time I was a mental health therapist and blew up my life. And then I had to put myself back together again. And I had the convenience of having a mental health degree and then using it to put myself back together. And since then, I've been trying to figure out how to help people make better use of the mental health world and I guess learn the things that I took for granted.
That's awesome. And yeah, Dan mentioned we did meet playing racquetball, and I actually, after COVID lockdown, of course, shut everyone pretty much down, even a lot of professional racquetball players for a year. I was excited. My first A division win was the night before I played Dan, and I've been a pretty solid B player. So I come in, I'm on cloud nine, all the momentum, and Dan takes me from cloud nine to the deepest depths of the ocean. Just absolutely crushed me. But like Dan mentioned, some of his background on the bright side, he was kind enough to share his contacts. We talked in the locker room after, so he's gonna pick up the pieces of me a little bit after he destroyed it, right, Dan?
Well, I think the first thing we have to talk about is there's no jumping in racquetball, so I don't know how you're going to get to cloud nine anyway.
And I did just because I'm a very competitive person. Sorry, I was playing a chess cat, trying to dissect it to find any weaknesses before you joined. But here is the,
Oh, mercy.
as you can see,
Yeah.
Dan is a much more consistent, skilled, and experienced. How long have you been playing, Dan?
Oh, mercy. For far too long, like 15 years. And that Edwin Miller kid, oh man, he smoked me hard.
Oh, he won
He
it.
was rough. Huh?
He won it. He won it all.
Oh yeah. And then he went and won doubles right after that. They told me that a year ago he was playing pro open level, right? To be a pro player.
Hmm.
It certainly felt like that with that 15 to 2 score he put on me.
Is he? How old is he?
Oh, 18, 19,
Oh
just out of high
wow.
school, I think.
Yeah, I played or I saw a kid play. I would never step in the court with him. He was 15 when I saw him first, and he's from Iowa, and he was playing with Bradley Rogers, if you're familiar. I mean, competitive, and it's amazing how good some of the young players are. But let's just go through the scores real quick. As you can tell, I'm not super consistent. 15-11 my first game, then I fell off a cliff 115, and I got real mad and came back. And then Dan just really didn't struggle too much with me. But hopefully in future episodes, I might go out to Texas or Oregon or wherever you're at, and we might get a in person game, and then maybe do something streaming in the racquetball court.
Well, I just found out last night my partner Bree got a message. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
California. She's going tomorrow, and I'm going in a couple days. So yeah,
Okay.
so we'll see where I'm playing out there.
All right. Well, we'll plan ahead, but we'll get going with some of the discussion. Let me get my chess stuff off the screen. I was actually creeping on Dan's Instagram a little bit before, and I came across several interesting things. But one of the things that really caught my eye was a course, and it was called Surviving the First Week After a Betrayal. And I called Dan about 5 or 6 p.m.
Yeah.
and I was like, I wish I would have saw this course just the start of COVID lockdown, because a lot of the
Yeah.
ideas, though the focus is more betrayal in romantic relationships and overcoming that, a lot of those ideas correlate to my passions,
Mhm.
mainly mental health. Uh,
Mhm.
One of the things, and we won't go too into depth because that's not the main focus of this discussion, but one of the things I really like, Dan, is you mentioned 72 hours,
Mhm.
getting through those first 72 hours. And for me, with a mental health history, and I've lost one very close friend to suicide, I really felt like that was something I wanted to get your
Mhm.
thoughts on, because especially with the way the world is, if we can just get through, there's sometimes you just got to fight through and survive and make sure
Mhm.
you're in a position for the future. So why did you say 72 hours, and what's the significance of that?
Well, shoot, there's a whole long story behind it.
Okay.
One of the things that in my story was really helpful was having a sense of how long an emotion would last for, how long a
Mm-hmm.
mood would last for, how long when you feel like you're in your deepest, darkest depths, how long that
Mm-hmm.
would last for,
Right.
right? Okay. And so the reason I said 72 hours is in most states, if a person is suicidal, right, they're held for 48 to 72 hours. And statistically, that is the time period where you get from your very bottom to back to
Uh-huh.
a fairly functional level again, potentially.
Okay. At least not a life-threatening state anymore.
Right. Because there's something in us that wants to be balanced, right?
Uh-huh.
And when our emotions get to that deepest, darkest place, we'll try to rebalance again. And the majority of people get left go, right, within 72 hours. Obviously,
Okay.
a lot don't, but most do.
Okay. And that's awesome that you shared that. I've shared a little bit of my mental health background, and again, we won't dive into that too much. But in college, I spent one day in a similar environment,
Mhm.
and at the time, it's like my friends have they're all partying and they're great. And on paper, I mean, my Facebook looked great. I was
Mhm.
dated a few pretty girls, and my grades were good. I was athletic, and I wonder how many people were going through that, or might have even lost their lives. But had they known that that is an option, and also in that discussion, then we'll get off that topic. You and your partner, Stephen, I don't
Drummo.
want to. Okay, y'all discussed avoiding social media, at least right after something
Yeah,
tragic
yeah.
or a betrayal. And for me, I think with your expertise and also the field of romantic betrayal, maybe just stay off social media pretty much permanently and don't
Mhm.
discuss that at all. Right?
Mhm. Have you ever heard what is two unicorns plus two unicorns?
Is that a saying or a book?
It's a legitimate question. It's a trick question, but it's legitimate.
Say it again.
What is two unicorns plus two unicorns?
Before unicorns.
Okay, so that is the truth, but unicorns aren't real. So we have a problem of being able to tell the difference between truth and reality,
Hmm.
right? Truth, like if you think about it like in an old Greek philosophical sense,
Okay.
there's a platonic ideal, right? There's like, if I say red, in your mind, a color will come up, and that is the perfect sense of red. It's a true red, but it's
Uh
also
huh.
not real because it's not out there, right? And so when you compare the two, they don't quite line up.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that happens with relationships, um, yeah, I kind of actually just lost my track of thought. Where were we at with that? What was your original question?
It wasn't a question. Where I was going is with avoiding social media.
Oh, yes. So here's the piece. Thank you. Social media is such a way to present yourself,
Uh huh.
right? It doesn't have to do anything with reality, right? And so that first question you asked about the 72 hours, that is about managing our emotions, right?
Uh huh.
Social media is about presenting yourself as you want to be seen, and it evokes certain emotions. And I think with that, right, when people present themselves, clearly they want to look the best they can and make a certain statement or image with it.
True.
The effect of that is, am I actually good enough? So it evokes certain amounts of fear and
Uh-huh.
envy in people,
Right.
right? And so in the conversation around betrayal, the issue is, okay, I feel lost. I need to get myself regrounded. So I'm going to go to social media.
Uh-huh.
And what you're not engaging with is it's not reality. It's
Right.
this image that people want. And so what happens then is people will go and try to blast their partner. They'll try
Mm-hmm.
to say, this person did this, this, and this. And the point that Stephen makes with that is that when you just come through a betrayal, your entire sense of reality is crushed,
Uh-huh.
right? That 72 hours is approximately how long it takes for you to start to find a new sense of balance in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're out there blasting your partner on social media, suppose you have a little kid, the little kid learns, oh, my daddy or my mommy is a, and then you could fill in the blanks with what happens
Uh-huh.
to social media.
Yeah. Yeah. And with COVID, I'm sure that problem's never been worse. And the 72 hours for me, I kind of have a similar rule with social media, which obviously is a content creator,
Mhm,
amplified by COVID and social isolation.
mhm.
You have to get your ideas out. And unfortunately, if I'm not dramatic and really tell some personal stories, you're competing for attention. And
Yeah.
obviously, you want money, you want your ideas to be heard, but you have to. It's a delicate balance. And a lot of my stuff, my more dramatic videos, are intentionally dramatized, but I always try to, journal. And
Mhm,
if I have an idea, it might not seem like it sometimes, but I try to wait 48 hours to
mhm.
let that sit and make sure either I adjust it a little bit, or there's been a lot where I just don't publish anything. And maybe I should have done that more, but I think at least having some type of process to go through it and think about long-term implications is important, even if we're wrong, to just kind of start getting in that mindset of something to avoid just think something, post it.
Well, and to what you were just saying, there's so much of things have to be so dramatic and so intense to catch our attention,
Uh-huh.
right? I was actually just having a conversation with my girlfriend's grandmother the other day, and she
Mm-hmm.
said, you do a really nice job of just sitting and holding a conversation. And I said, well, I really think it's a dying art form, right? People don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And she said, why do you think that is? And I'm sure there's 100 reasons, but the one that comes to my mind, right, is so we're sitting here talking 60 to 100 words a minute if we're doing good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But our brains are running, right?
Yeah.
You probably could be thinking about what you're drinking, what other people are doing, your chess match, all these things could be happening at the same time. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the scheme of things, I might be pretty boring.
And like we talked about in a previous conversation that obviously wasn't recorded, it's subjective. And that's another
Hmm.
thing as we transition to our main topic, which is uh, taking a leap of faith, finding what we're passionate about, and then the courage to pursue it. And maybe some of that goes with what you just said. And I liked a few posts on your Instagram page, mainly one discussed being present,
Hmm.
because I think too many, and I'm only 27 years old, so life experience is limited. But for me personally, it's a really interesting balance of trying to socialize, catch up with friends, get
Hmm.
feedback on your goals, if they're feasible, how you're going to approach them. Because sometimes I'm like, good point, but also I think the only way to really establish that confident presence that can add value to the world in any way is you have to get comfortable with some alone time. What are your thoughts
Hmm.
on that balance?
Well, let me first say the conversation about being present is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a all these people in the world feel alone and isolated, right? And they spend so much effort trying to find connection somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can sit with a person, look them in the eye, and actually genuinely hear what they said, so in that moment they don't feel alone, like really, what better gift is there,
Yeah.
right? And it's something we can give freely.
Yeah.
It's something that we can give freely.
And I think to do that is also the best way to develop opportunities for yourself, not only helping a friend or just a stranger, but learning. It's
Mhm.
tempting, especially with I moved to St. Louis not super long ago, so I don't have my family close by anymore, and I've got a few friends I met through meetup events. But it's tempting when you're not around people a lot. And I dealt blackjack, so obviously I'm trying to listen a lot more than I talk and focus. So when I'm
Hmm.
in a social environment, I want to talk because I want my ideas to be heard. I want attention to some extent and appreciation for my ideas, but you don't learn much that way.
Yeah.
And that's what I gathered from our previous conversation is too many don't take that leap of faith. And that's probably one of their biggest regrets when they're old or even middle age. You know, you're climbing the corporate ranks, say you're making good money doing well, and you just don't know who you are. But I think they don't because of all that noise telling them you have to know where you're going. You have to know what you're going to do if you leave that job or cut back hours or get out of that abusive relationship, whatever it is. And you have to know this is going to happen. Then I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to go here. And then I'll be at this point. And my thing that I had to realize is taking a leap of faith is usually the first step to finding that path. You don't have it figured out before you do. Part of that pain from leaving what was comfortable is what can develop your drive and love for your passions that's
Hmm.
enough to overcome all the adversity and loneliness.
Well, in a moment ago, you asked me my thoughts on the need to be alone.
Mm-hmm.
And when you told me that story, the first thing that came to my mind is the issues that we all face. Like we are raised generally in a family environment, the majority of us,
Uh-huh.
right? In that family environment, they're responsible for teaching us whatever it is that it means to be a good human, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the question. Like, what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be happy? All these things. What does it mean to be a good human?
Mm-hmm.
So they give us expectations and they create this whole story and narrative for us that
Mm-hmm.
most people follow maybe all their lives, but at the very least, until you get to high school, college, shortly after, and then you're kind of left on your own. And
Mm-hmm.
there's actually, Steve told me this. In New Zealand, there's a saying the tallest poppy loses their head,
What was
right?
that?
The tallest poppy loses their head.
Okay.
So you imagine it starts to grow, then a weed whacker comes and takes it off.
Mm-hmm.
So, what it means is in your family, the family tells you how to live, where to live, what you should do. And then at some point, you realize it's not your story. And then you go about trying to figure yourself out. And when
Mm-hmm.
you do that, subtly, your family will start to try to pull you back. They'll tell
Mm-hmm.
you you're doing the wrong thing. They'll make you feel guilty. They'll remind you of all the ways that you can fail, right? And so
Uh-huh.
there is your leap of faith. But there is becoming an honest individual and not being part of the herd. But the question is, do you leave your family? Do you just go to what culture tells you, or your social group tells you, or your new wife's family tells you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when do you actually yourself? And you said about being lonely or being able to tolerate being alone.
Mm-hmm.
In that moment, when all those thoughts raise, right? Can you just really be with the thoughts and the anxiety and the worries?
Uh, For me, if you're asking, and I'd love to answer that, 'cause that's a great question.
Have at it.
And you said a lot of great things in that short time. But for me, at first, because I had a really comfortable job when COVID lockdown hit,
Mhm.
and some of it was forced. It wasn't like, oh, I'm so brave, I'm leaving and I'm going to make it and I'm going to do all this. It was, I don't think that's for me.
Mhm.
My family was happy. You know, for the first Christmas in probably my life, and especially my adult life, I'm like, my family's not really super proud. And I remember
Mhm.
even when I was like, am I really adding value? Is this meaningful work? I remember it's great to go home with my ex-girlfriend, who was a great girl from a good family, and we're gonna have dinner and we're gonna see Granny Gramps. We're gonna watch uh, Christmas Vacation, and
Mhm.
to not have those uh, things to look forward to, because I knew even if I went, I would get criticism. It
Mhm.
was hard, and I learned for me to slow my brain, like you mentioned, to keep your brain from racing. At first, it did. And I
Mhm.
found if I can just sit still for at first 5 minutes
Yeah.
and then still have my schedule, but that 5 minutes, I don't care if mom calls unless she has told me I need to have my phone on because her diabetes, my mom's diabetic, and she's having an insulin reaction or something. And then I got to 10 minutes. And then on some days I would do 30 or an hour. But at first, there were times I didn't even make it,
Mhm.
which is odd because you feel like a failure. You're like, I can't sit still for 10 minutes.
Mhm.
Well, what did I accomplish? That's the goal. You're not trying to accomplish anything. And then slowly it got to where I'm not going to make it anymore. I've got to go on Tinder or on Facebook or something to you hit that point where it's not like you enjoy it, but in some ways you look forward to it. And I think most people never get to that point, which is usually where some of the breakthroughs happen and you find out your path and your talents. Like you've talked about previously, we have a finite amount of time, which is very stressful because we want to pursue all these things. But to me, a balance of sitting still and just trying things that really scare you are the best ways to find your talents. Um, and I don't see any other way to really do that.
Yeah, what you're talking about is so important. I'm working on putting together like a whole course of this. That way people can work through it in a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
organized way. Because I
Mm-hmm.
know me is all trial and error, and I felt like I wasted so much time. I learned many useful things, and most of it was learning how to tolerate failure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did I get to this place? And when you're talking about finding these passions and finding your interests, there's so many complicated emotions that show up for so many reasons, right? If you're not willing to notice and feel them and understand why they're there, then what do you do with them? You turn them into a different emotion. You distort your own reality,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I actually just had a conversation a little bit ago with a young woman, and she's like, God, if I could just meet an emotionally intelligent man. And I said, wow, it's amazing you have a magnet for that, don't you? But it's such a true thing. Yeah.
And a lot of dating with COVID in general, I know I've been in scenarios where I don't know that I've ever said I want to meet an emotionally intelligent woman, but I do. And that's the
Mhm.
only way to accomplish what you want in business, life, or even just our casual friendship, which we've only discussed on two occasions after racquetball, but just going up and saying, hey, afterwards, good job. And we just had a little chat and then we found out we had interests. And doing that for me, I grew up in a sports environment, but I was shy and my dad coached. So he was always there to kind of communicate with the hotel when we checked in, or if someone was
Yeah.
just really in the stands being hateful, he could stand up for my friends and me. So I never had to learn that skill, but
Hmm.
that is with COVID so important to get comfortable or maybe get readjusted to meeting new people and really training your brain to think, what is the worst that can happen if I walk up to Dan Gummo, who just beat me pretty badly in racquetball? Well, no, I mean, I'm kind of joking, but really, you sit there and okay, if he's mean about it, he's not someone I want to ever see again anyway. And obviously, you weren't, and very few would be. And the best case scenario is you get ideas, you develop a connection, but I think too many just have that instinct of social anxiety and they don't, or maybe they have a past experience and the
Yeah.
work and that person might be like this person or that person. Or if I started doing YouTube and streaming mental health advocacy, what if this happens? And I always write it in my journal. I wrote down a dollar amount that if I get to that, I'll go get a job. And then I started dealing blackjack. My friends are going crazy. My family's, oh, you grew up playing sports. You didn't play music. You didn't do this. I'm like, yeah, but I've developed some ability that I might have been able to do when I was younger. I just didn't invest any time into it. And then when everyone was panicking, I hit that number financially, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a job. Cool. But still, that instinct is to worry like everyone else is. And now I've got that experience dealing blackjack. They're awesome, and I actually just uh, resigned today. But we left on good terms. And I told them about my
Mhm.
streaming. I told them about losing a friend to suicide, why I'm doing this. And they said, some of them were like, yeah, we'll support that. If you give us your channel name, we'll subscribe. And my boss's boss wished me the best and said, thank you for letting us know, ending on good terms. And if it doesn't work out, you're not going to forget how to deal cards. And then you walk out, you're like, why did I spend any time worrying about that? Those people were
Hmm.
great with good intentions.
Can I answer your question?
Please.
All right. Suppose you're chilling in the savannah, right? and there's like a handful of critters sitting around. There's a lion, a crocodile, a hippo, and a rhinoceros, and a human. Which one's going to die first?
A lion, a crocodile, a hippo, and a human.
And a rhinoceros. Who's going to die first?
Probably the human.
Right? And now there's 8 billion of us and just maybe a million of all the other ones combined anymore. Maybe more crocodiles, whatever. So, but like, what is it that gives humans the advantage over lions, crocodiles, rhinoceroses, and hippos?
Brain.
Right? And what does our brains do? What do they do?
Our brains over them that gives us that advantage.
Yeah, we worry. That's what our brains are meant to do,
Okay. I was going to say self-awareness,
right?
but I see your point. Yeah.
Right? And so if you're walking along the savannah and you see a rope, right,
Mm-hmm.
on the ground, your brain might think 1,000 times over it's a snake before it's actually a snake. But as far as your brain's concerned, it saved you 1,000 times, right? Because
True.
emotions are greedy, right? If they work for you, they're going to keep showing up. Like this is how people get anger issues, right? This
I
is how
love it.
people get anxiety issues. And
Uh-huh.
so the reason I'm saying that, right, is you asked why. The question why is a trick. But if we can actually appreciate, to genuinely appreciate what it is in our own history that makes us worry,
Mm-hmm.
right? Oh, I got to worry about money. It's actually a really beautiful thing.
Worry.
The fact that our brain and who we are has been created to help us survive
Mm-hmm.
to the point where we can live all around the planet in cold places, hot places, in the jungle, in the city, anywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's meant to do. And if you think about all the emotions that we have, right? We have happiness and love. But then over here we have fear and anger and disgust and shame and jealousy and envy. And good Lord, there's probably more that I can't think of. But so why do we only have two pleasant ones with all these miserable? And actually, and if you think about love, love isn't always pleasant either,
Fair.
right? Because what does happiness do? Like it'll help us get dinner tonight, help us
Mm-hmm.
get laid, right? But then as soon as we get that, next thing you know, you eat too much cake, you get diabetes, you get laid too
Uh-huh.
much, you get herpes. It's not going to help you be happy forever, right? But
Right.
whereas like fear and anxiety, they'll keep you going, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of bizarre. And I think if we manifest a relationship with our emotional life, well, we don't have to like it. That's not the point. But where
Uh-huh.
we genuinely appreciate it and love our own emotional life, what it's trying to do for us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we can sit at the table with it. And I always use this metaphor, right? We're at a big kitchen table and we're like a
Mm-hmm.
family, right? There's this part of myself and that part of myself, and then the worker part of me. But then over there's the angry Dan, there's fearful Dan, there's Dan the lover. But like all these parts of me have a voice. They're all
Mm-hmm.
here for a reason. They all showed up for a reason. And if I let them do what they're good at, I'm going to have a great life. And if I let Angry Dan run the show, I'm going to be an asshole and nobody's going to like him, right? We would have not become friends. We would not started doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
Good perspective. A lot of your ideas, at least to me, seem um, to encourage letting all the emotions come, feeling them, but then
yeah,
acknowledging them and trying to use them for the best good possible. Like we talked about, for me, I got up on stage and sang karaoke mainly to start because it was very scary. I didn't like it. I don't really like large gatherings, though I've done well in smaller groups. And then I started having fun. People started laughing at me. And then I started, that initial reaction of, hey, angry Dayton coming out. And then I'm thinking,
hmm
well, that person has not got up here one time
hmm
the entire time. And so then it kind of gets to a point where you realize that doing that step by step gives you not only confidence, but a lot of my YouTube stuff is music based, and you don't realize how much potential you have if you always listen to your family,
hmm
or always, like you mentioned, a little bit of PTSD um, work that you've done, and how
hmm
to break people from that. And I want to get your thoughts on this because one of the books that you might have seen it. Have you seen that book?
I have not.
It's a little bit of what you talk about, but for me, I used it more. there's some examples of like Olympic volleyball players, and at that level,
Mhm.
it's so stressful because there's so many psychological aspects to the game because everyone's so talented. And it helped me to not overthink, like before a lot of shorter videos, especially if there's
Yeah.
more complicated music, I'll get something, I'll practice, I'll go through the scales in my head until I can like literally play without looking. And
Mhm.
then I think where most people either lose uh, ability, don't perform as well as they could, or look nervous, I learned to not think about it. You know, I'm not thinking about it when
Mhm.
I'm doing it. After I do all that thinking and planning, I take a ball or like a stress ball and I just ball, clear, trying to do something to clear my head. And that's what the
Mhm.
third space is about, is taking that extra little bit of time in between tasks to set your
Mhm.
intentions and not let the negative emotions override your potential.
Yeah. Well, I think for what you're going into, right? When I think of sports psychology
Mm-hmm.
and the sports behaviorism specifically, like when we learn a new behavior, right? So we play racquetball, right? So hitting a ball, there's all these fine motor skills that are involved, and we're
Mm-hmm.
essentially building up the nerves in our arms to make it happen automatically, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so over time, the difference between the nerves in our arm and our brain is just the way that some biologists once upon a time cut us up. They are all
Okay.
related. So if once we learn the steps, the behavioral steps of learning a skill,
Mm-hmm.
right? First you memorize the chords, then you learn where you put your fingers and you learn it step by step, piece by piece.
Mm-hmm.
Then behaviorally, you force yourself to do it. You're slowly building these neurological connections,
Ah.
right? And so we know that sleep is necessary and good diet's necessary and not stressing too
Mm-hmm.
much is necessary. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's this behavioral thing. So you learn a skill, like you learn to play a chord, but you're not free to use it yet. You have to do it kind of mechanically. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's this moment where you start to become conscious of the process. But the problem becoming conscious is then you regress all the way back because you have to learn to put it all together again. And I think one of
Okay.
the things that um, between like music and sports, but also emotionally, once you recognize the process, it gives you an immense amount of freedom to control these behavioral deterministic processes that actually control our lives.
Mm.
Could I give you a different example of that?
Yeah, I think I followed it, but yeah, please.
Okay, so have you ever heard of the McLean model of the brain? So your
Who is
brain
this?
sits in your head like this. Um, this is your brain stem, this is your limbic system, and this is your cortex, right?
Okay.
And so the only part of us that's conscious and knows what time it is right here, the middle finger, right? Right, the
Okay.
part of us that goes and f's ourselves pretty much. So the point of the matter, the point of the matter is that's the only part that knows what time it is. The rest
Mm-hmm.
of it is just kind of on autopilot. It's just unconscious,
Uh-huh.
right? And so it's like you're learning music or sport. This is all happening. And when we something happens to us emotionally, the information comes in, gets to our brainstem, comes up, and it splits. And it's always quicker to go here than it is here,
Uh-huh.
right? So you have to build the neurological connection. The same way you learn with your fingers over time to play the piano,
Mm-hmm.
you're learning to handle emotions and then to have that emotional freedom. I told you the story of I was a kid who was very much sheltered and I used to be
Uh-huh.
very, very fat. And I was terrified of locker rooms, right? I wouldn't go swimming without a shirt on. And
Mm-hmm.
when I realized I understood the process of teaching someone how to deal with anxiety for like heights, dealing with shame and embarrassment in the locker room is the same process. So I built
Mm-hmm.
myself out a plan. And over time, like you said, I would go and I'd push, then I started to become uncomfortable, and then I'd step back. And then the next day I'd go again and just keep
Uh-huh.
going back and forth. And to now, it's a good thing I live in Oregon because they throw me out of some places, especially if I stayed here in Texas.
Yeah.
You know, so they just let it all hang out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And the only way to get there, like you said, is one day at a time, one step at a time. And that is a good story or
Mhm.
lesson for not only overcoming insecurities, but
Mhm.
with what we talked about previously, starting a business, dating, anything that automatically people are going to say that's not right, that's not the person you should be with,
Yeah.
that's not going to work. You know, like my grandpa, who I love, we've had a great relationship, and we still will. He doesn't know how to sign into YouTube. Nothing personal.
Yeah.
And when I told him I was on YouTube, that's not going to work, Dayton Carr. I can't predict the future. So any successful person could have failed. It's possible. So you're right. Um, but to not even to shut down before is
Mhm.
scary because it's an impossible statistic to gather. But how many people have had ideas that would have worked and helped people and either never started or got to that point where they were so close they just needed to twist something with their approach or their training or their mindset, and then they quit. I mean, it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
sad, but that's why I go and do karaoke, or you took those baby steps, because you get all those, I call them mental representations, which, like the piano, like you said, yeah, I had to sit there and count and what's the correlation between whole and half notes and the chord and this scale, what notes are in it. And now I'm pretty close to where I don't know that I'd want to play in a band, but if someone said we're in the key of E minor, transpose it to C sharp minor, I'll be like, got it. But it took all those hours of sitting there during COVID lockdown alone that I didn't even consider that going towards a goal of being a musician if I end up a musician. But now looking back is just taking that action out of, not having anything to do. How many of those things that I don't even realize or remember or pieces I've played are going to come out when I play now? Probably a lot, like you mentioned with your subconscious mind. It's an experience that I have that can help me uh, in a future scenario that I don't even know is going to come up yet.
Can I beg you a question?
Yeah,
What's the difference between an acorn and an oak tree?
an acorn and an oak tree.
Yeah.
I don't know.
What's the difference between dating the piano player today and the guy that might join a band tomorrow? You guys are
I don't.
both you and the acorn. You're in different states of becoming,
Uh huh.
right? An acorn and an oak tree is the same thing.
Oh, I thought you said I was confused. I thought you said a chord. I thought you said a
Ah!
chord. I'm sitting here. I'm sitting here. I'm like I'm going nowhere. I'm going to be stagnant for the
Nothing.
rest of my life. I thought you were a nice person, Dan.
Like, Dan, what's the difference between a question that makes sense and whatever drivel just came out of your
No,
mouth?
that's one of the downsides to doing. I'm following you now. Yeah.
But there's a question in it, right? You're saying about maybe I won't join a band. You said maybe I'll become a musician.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me that you already are,
Depending on how you
right?
define it. I guess I
And
don't
one
want
of
to
the,
be, so I don't consider myself one. But fair.
well, I mean, I don't consider myself an athlete either, but things happen.
But you beat me pretty bad.
I'm just saying. So, but if you put me in front of a keyboard, the only noise that would happen is when I spill my coffee on it, and you'd be, oh
Uh-huh.
no, that's the only noise it would make. It wouldn't be like Ave Maria or anything.
Yeah.
But but you said about potentials,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things that we really have to wrestle with in our life is we are all given some potentials. Some people lots of them, some people not
Mm-hmm.
so many, but generally we have more potential than we have life.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you choose which potentials you're going to make real? How do you choose which ones to put your energy into and not regret at the end of your days?
Mm-hmm.
And does it
Well,
actually matter?
does it matter which path you take?
Yeah.
That would be, we ought to actually follow up and have that be our main topic, because that's dealing blackjack or playing chess. It's always so natural to say, what was that next card had I
Mhm.
hit? Or, and I'm an
Mhm.
intermediate chess player. My goal is primarily chess. I like chess a lot for a variety of reasons more than music. But if we would have done this or that line, if you're doing it constructively to learn for future play, that's one thing. But to
Mhm.
do it to torture yourself, then that would have happened. It would have opened up this
Mhm.
attack. It's hard not to, but it's so peaceful to just accept
Mhm.
what happened and say, okay, well, maybe that would have been better, but maybe my opponent's strengths are geared toward what that line would have played out, and it would have been worse. And I focus my energy on this line, make it the best I can.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the things with that that's interesting is when I was a kid, so I enjoy watching sports also, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I've been a lifetime Pittsburgh Steelers fan. when I was a kid, if they would lose, I'd be really upset and bothered by it, right?
Hmm.
So the years go on, the years go on. There's up years, down years, whatever. And so they play a team every year twice called the Baltimore Ravens, right?
Uh-huh.
And when I was a kid, I hated
Yeah.
that team. I hated that team. And then at some point, I realized that my enjoyment of being a Pittsburgh Steelers fan would not be nearly as much fun if there wasn't a Ravens,
Mm.
right? And so there's this nature of in Western society, we are so driven by competition,
Mm.
right? We're driven by competition, but we have to one up the other. But we don't appreciate that it's kind of like a dance. We need the other to actually have a story.
Good point. Good point. Do you think successful people realize that more so than people who maybe had the talent but chose not to try or complain? Because I think that's probably a big motivator of this isn't for me because all these obstacles or all these enemies I might create, whereas a successful person might learn to respect the differences and use it as a challenge.
Well, let me answer your question with a story.
Mm-hmm.
A long time ago in Mexico, there's a German businessman who owns a
Uh-huh.
big company and a Mexican fisher. And it's about lunchtime, and the German guy is walking along the beach and he's looking around seeing what opportunities are there. And there's the Mexican guy's taking a nap, right? His sombrero and all that. He has these two big fish beside him in a boat. And he accidentally bumps the Mexican guy and he says, "Excuse me." And he says, "Hey, are these your fish?" And the guy says, "Yeah. I caught them earlier today and I'm going to take them home. We're going to have dinner with my family and we're going to dance and sing a little bit. It's going to be fun." But the German guy says, "Wow, you got two fish and it's only lunchtime. You could go fish for 4 or 5 more hours and then get two more fish and then you could buy another boat and then you could hire some other people to go fish for you
Mm-hmm.
and then they could fish and you could just keep watching them and then next thing you know when you're 60 or 70 years old then you'll have time to go spend it with your family sing and dance, right?" And so
Mm-hmm.
my question is the German guy who has a lot of money and owns a business or the Mexican guy who hangs out with his family and sings and dances, who's the successful one,
Which the answer is
right?
subjective. It depends.
Completely. And the trick in all this is each of us are given a story by our family.
Hmm.
And actually, I just read an article about do you ever hear the name Andrew Luck?
The football player?
Yeah, the football player, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Andrew Luck, right? He has a rocket for an arm. He's brilliant. He has a degree in architecture, right? Great grades. And marries
Stanford,
this
right?
beautiful lady. And yeah, he gets drafted first overall, makes $100 million in 6 years or something like this.
Wow.
And he's supposed to save this franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And apparently in the NFL, if you're a quarterback, you tell everyone what to do. It's the most narcissistic occupation you can have, and they want you to do that, right?
uh,
And so you imagine little Andrew Luck, his dad's taking him to football, or his mom is, and they're training him and doing all the things you're supposed to do so he can be a successful football player. And he's going to college to play football. Then he goes to the NFL to play football. He's
mm-hmm.
making money, beautiful wife, doing the story, but then he hurts himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he can't quite do what he used to do. And
Mm.
he realizes that his wife, right, is kind of annoyed by him. She doesn't want to spend time with him anymore. She's talking about leaving. And his body will not allow him to continue to do what he's supposed to do.
Mm.
And being a star NFL quarterback means you have to control everyone and everything around you. So he's kind of a jerk,
Huh?
right?
At
So $100
home,
million,
he
dollars,
kind of brings that work mindset home. You mean?
yeah. The story was he would go to dinner and everyone would sit down at the table and he would say, this person's getting this and that person's getting that. And he would go all the way around. And
Uh-huh.
apparently, this is a fairly common thing to happen, right? Because if you're a quarterback, you have to tell your offensive line to do this, your wide receivers to do that, the running back to do this. That's the story. So the question is, was he more successful, right, as this $100 million star quarterback, or the guy who saved his marriage, saved his body, and was a dad?
If you ask him, I'm sure the latter.
Yeah. And one of the things that I find, so I do consultation work with folks just to help them
Mm-hmm.
kind of get through these processes.
Mm-hmm.
I use a lot of Socratic dialogue because I don't want to tell people what to do with their lives. They don't need me
Mm-hmm.
for that,
Mm.
right? But to churn through and give them an honest listen, yeah, almost always. people kind of settle in a place is around relationships
Mm,
create the meaning for us, right? Right. When I think back to the racquetball tournament that we met at,
hmm.
like odds are I'll probably forget the racquetball games. Maybe not if we keep talking about it, but I'll probably remember you much longer, right? Because it's the relationship that matters more,
Hmm.
right? So I think that's just hopefully a moral that everyone can kind of sit with.
Yeah, yeah. It's something maybe I'll get out of as I mature or with more life experience that I go through right now is why can't I have my cake and eat it too?
Hmm.
In Andrew Luck's case, obviously, had the injury not happened, it's impossible to know. Maybe it could have worked out. Could have had football and the marriage. I do encourage anyone listening to take a chance. And if everyone says you can't have a supportive
Hmm.
family and try to chase whatever dream is on your mind, maybe you're right. Maybe if you have a wife or a husband and three kids, you might have to
Yeah,
adjust your dream, and that's fine. You can't have your cake and eat it too. But there are a lot of cases where you certainly can. My family might not like this guy. Look what he said. Oh, but my last boyfriend did this to me, and at least I might trust him, or he has traits that I am interested in. But, and that goes kind of back
hmm,
to like what we talked about with the less desirable or angrier traits
hmm,
is to try not to associate what happened in the past or someone else's uh, life experience or behavior with another person or experience because you're going to risk missing out.
yeah. I think there's a question of like, so you started off this question, the whole conversation about the 72 hours business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that happens to us, right? We go fight, flight, or freeze. And in
Mm-hmm.
those moments, that emotional part of us just takes over, right? The rational part
Mm-hmm.
of us is just out the window. And so when we're in that place, it's all black or white. I either can do this or I can't do this.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're in a rational place, we can see all those shades of gray.
Mm-hmm.
So a story real quick is my partner has a bachelor's degree in the fine art of dance. She's an amazing dancer. She can do all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of tumbles, flips, spins. Couldn't tell you.
Mm-hmm.
But she blew out her back,
Mm-hmm.
right? So she can dance, but she can't dance as much as she wants. And she has an interest in doing like emergency management work, right? So
Okay.
she's left with this issue like, do I be a dancer? Do I do emergency management? Now,
Mm-hmm.
the mature, responsible, financially responsible people say, well, you should definitely do emergency management, right? But what if her calling really is dance,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so for me, I just listen and ask questions. The only thing I tell her is like, the fact of the matter is, the older you get, the harder it is to do athletic things. Just a fact, right? But everything else is up to her to decide.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly like you said. So often we're told you should do this because this is what's best for you because you will make more money, have more prestige, have more power,
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
And as we continue through COVID and layoffs to what seemed like perfect dream jobs in Silicon Valley, uh, if that's for you and that's your dream, then still obviously go pursue that
Yeah.
path. But if it's not, and you feel like you have a talent or you're young with little responsibility and you think you might, maybe go dance because
Yeah.
a lot of or comedians are great examples. That's the loser, the fool, the class clown, and but that's had they tried to go sit in an office or something, they would have been fired,
Yeah.
maybe been so depressed they got on drugs, and now even if they don't make it huge, they might make a living. Um, but if it's all right, Dan, to go ahead and close this one, mainly because I want to get a little bit of revenge and meet up for racquetball in person in the future. Um, and really let some of these ideas circulate, maybe get some comments and follow up with you. Is that all right, or do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I would just add to put a couple words of vocabulary out there for this topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a concept of vocation and a concept of avocation.
Mm-hmm.
So vocation is when you take your passion and you figure out how to make money for it, right? That's great. And it's also kind of a privilege that most people won't ever have the opportunity to get for whatever reason. And it
Hmm.
also doesn't mean you shouldn't aim for it, but it is. On the other hand, there's a vocation, right?
Hmm.
And I mean, when I think about someone who picks up my trash, right, I don't think to myself, wow, this is what they've always dreamed of doing their whole life, right? They probably, maybe they play in a band in the evening, or maybe they do
Hmm.
classic ballroom dancing, or maybe they play racquetball with us.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's their avocation. And I think it's helpful for everyone to just to be able to consider, okay, these are the ways that we balance, right?
Hmm.
Like my brother, he works at a golf course fixing stuff, but he has two little kids and a wife. And so he doesn't get to have a vocation, but he has an
Hmm.
avocation, right? Playing with his kids, doing some other traveling things,
Hmm.
whatever. Beyond that, I'd love to sit and have this chat again. I think that'd be fantastic.
That'd be
Hear what
awesome.
people have to say. And, if anyone has any questions or I do consultations and I'd love to talk.
I'll I'll put a link to your Instagram, and I'll get in touch with you offline maybe if there's a better way
Excellent.
to connect with you and Stephen and what some of your work. Um,
Oh, maybe I
just
should
let
explain that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just real quick. So Stephen Dromgold is a couples therapy trainer, and he
Hmm.
owns an agency in New Zealand, and I help him with that. I run a website called Courage for the Day, and it's
Hmm.
from my worst days, like figuring out how to get through my worst days and
Hmm.
helping other people do that. So if you want to talk to me, go to Courage for the Day. I do free consultations. Let's chat. So, yeah.
Couragefortheday.com.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'll put that link and disclaimer. I've said a lot of things in previous videos compared to some of the things that a lot of streamers say. I'm pretty tamed, but Dan and his partner, well, we're friends. We share a lot of ideas. It doesn't necessarily mean that he agrees with everything. So if you're considering, I know you'll have a book also, um, which is called.
The book is about essentially how to create really happy relationships. The
Mhm.
secret to relationship happiness.
Okay.
And it's really actually it's pretty inexpensive on Amazon. And if you go to our website, relationshipchampions.com,
Hmm.
there's a free version of it that you can get as a course. So you just read through the whole thing.
Hmm.
And the gist of that is people blow up relationships for the worst reasons. And we just don't know how to have them. So it gives you the clue.
There
45
you
minutes, a cup of coffee, you'll read the whole thing.
there you go. And if you're reading that and you're like, man, this guy's calm, he's mature, he's got these great ideas, he's well read, and then you see one of my shirtless piano videos, just make sure you know, that that's his work that I support, but we're not writing the book together or anything. But Dan, thank you so much for joining. Your ideas are not only fascinating, but I think some of your work can be really, really valuable for what the world's going through right now, and the mental health crisis, the loneliness, and a lot of the uncertainty. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. We'll talk soon.